Hello everyone, Jay here from Jade Productions, taking a moment out of everyone's day to talk about the Kurnothi and Warhammer Underworlds Beastgrave and what they mean for the setting and Age of Sigmar as a whole. Now, there hasn't been a lot of discussion on this. There's been a tiny bit on the Discords that I've seen, that I frequent for Age of Sigmar, but not a whole lot that I've seen presented on it. Now, when it comes to Warhammer Underworlds, it's typically something I like to ignore, mostly for the fact that I don't really play it, but it does present some interesting patterns that I see emerging, and that's typically whenever Warhammer Underworlds receives something, in which it typically receives something first, before the main Age of Sigmar game, due to its smaller scale, in terms of models that need to be made and released, it tends to proceed, or almost act as like a prophecy of what's to come for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Now, it's not perfect in terms of this pattern, but it's still a pattern nonetheless, and I've seen this time and again. We didn't really see it with the first couple warbands, and then we got to see it with, Skaven made their appearance with Spiteclaw's Swarm, and that sort of signaled that Skaven would come eventually. Now, it wasn't until quite some time later that Skaven actually reappeared, but they came eventually. It was things like the Gloomspite Gits that certainly started to see the trending pattern of something happens for Underworld, and Age of Sigmar soon gets something relating to it later. And it happened with everything. So the two are intertwined because, of course, G-Dubs wants to keep their games together. They want to bring everything together and make it all cross-compatible. But it's a pattern nonetheless. Everything that Underworlds touches, sooner or later, we see something of it come to the main setting. And I'm not just talking about like the rules for the warbands being available in battle tomes, which is something I will talk about in this video real briefly, but it's more like the Gloomspite Gits. When we got Zarbag's Gits and we got Molog's Swarm, they were pretty much prophecies telling us that Gloomspite Gits were on the way. They were released beforehand. A little while later, we finally got Gloomspite Gits. In fact, to this day, there are only a couple of warbands that have been released that we haven't actually, that G-Dubs has never followed up on with some sort of larger release. And now I think they're more along the lines of they actually did plan these larger releases, but they're just coming very slowly. For example, they're catching up on certain factions. A prime example would be Thunderix Profiteers for the Caradon Overlords. I thought when that was coming, that when they were announced, that lo and behold, the poor Sky Dwarves might actually get a new book, which might be absolutely decent, instead of the hot garbage that is their current book. Hot garbage, which I'm actually starting an army for, believe it or not. Still, we're not going to rail on the Caradons this video. They already have it hard enough. And now we've got Beastgrave coming out, which ties in Beastmen with, finally, they have an Age of Sigmar equivalent they received quite some time ago with the Beasts of Chaos book. That was good. I expected to actually see Beasts of Chaos much quicker, but I guess G-Dubs is sort of planning out how they do it. And now, the Kurnothi are interesting to me in that here is a new faction that we have never seen before. They are visibly different. They have nothing they match with in the lore so far. They are entirely new. So in my mind, in the way that these Underworld releases tend to prophesize new factions in the same way they did with Gloomspite Gits, or they tend to coincide with the re-release of new factions like they did with the Sylvaneth. The only exceptions really being the Dark Oath. They actually didn't go anywhere, which really surprised me, the Godsworn Hunt. I thought for sure with the Godsworn Hunt we would see the advent of more Chaos Mortals. Instead, we actually got Warcry, which I guess is something. I still reckon we're going to see something for the Godsworn Hunt in a while, because that's something as well. Having watched the Underworld scene long enough, just out of curiosity of where they're going with some of these warband releases, it's sooner or later a book will come along that ties in these warbands. So that's something. Like, I'm still expecting that we will get a book for the Godsworn soon, a book for the Eyes of Nine in a re-released Disciples of Tzeentch, because that's first edition garbage. Fun, but garbage. We got it for the Sylvaneth. We're still waiting on the Dwarves. And that's about it. Everything else actually has a book, with the exception of the Iron Skulls boys. But we know that now that there is a new Orc War Clans coming out soon, which will probably have those in there. I don't think that was planned at the time that they probably released that one. Still, it's a follow-up on it. I'm not going to put that one I'm not going to put an overabundance onto that. But I reckon with the upcoming books for Age of Sigmar that we know are being released, we will see more warbands closely related to them. So I reckon we will see, in the Beastgrave set, an Ogre warband, or Ogar, however you want to pronounce it with copyright. Still, I reckon that's going to come along soon enough, simply because it fits with their theme of the current season. They're bringing a new book for it. They're already making new models for it. It's the perfect way to either hype for that new book or follow up on the hype of that new book by bringing that to the Underworld scene. And eventually, we all know it, G-Dubs is going to have a warband for every faction, except for Khorne, and except for the special Sigmar boys, who are going to have, like, 5 warbands at the end. Still waiting for a Flesh Eater Courts warband, but I reckon we'll get an Ossiarch warband. In fact, I pretty much guarantee we'll get a Flesh Eater one before the Ossiarchs, I reckon. Simply because the Beastgrave, once again, seems like the perfect place for it. G-Dubs are smart in terms of where they like to put their placements of releases. That's one thing about them. But the Kurnothi, they've got nothing. They are completely unrelated to everything else, with the exception of Kurnoth. Now, just reading real quick the little description for the Skaith's Wild Hunt warband. Skaith and his companions are worshippers of Kurnoth, the god of the hunt and fallen ally of Alariel, the goddess of life. They are beings both wild and fey, spiritual avatars of nature in its most primal and aggressive state, yet nobility tempers the savagery of the Kurnothi. They prey solely upon those bringers of ruin who desecrate the natural order, mercilessly hounding the footsteps of their foes and cutting them down to remove their taint from the mortal realms. Skaith's band seek to restore all that was ruined during the Age of Chaos and are merciless in the skull. That first, now, keeping that in mind, that first paragraph, that first sentence right there, Kurnoth and fallen ally of Alariel, that makes me think, okay, maybe they're going to write somewhere in the future that Kurnoth did actually survive, and his influence still survives through these elves, these wild elves, which are mutated, just like Kurnoth was with his Wild Hunt in the original, his avatar, the king of the Wood Elves. Maybe a whole race of those mutated deer-leg elves, which I was never a fan of, but the Kurnothi are kind of cool in that. But regardless, maybe they're going to retcon it so that he survived the end times, or he still exists with Alariel, or his influence, just like how Cain sort of still influences because people still believe in him, even though everything goes to Marathi, there's still some sort of element or fragment of him out there which imbues power into the Kurnothi and the Sylvaneth Kurnoth hunters, which makes him still a relevant god. The warband itself is pretty interesting to me in terms of what they look like. They look like something you'd expect of Wood Elves. So my first thought upon seeing them was, is this a possible replacement to the Wood Elves and Wanderers, which have now had the majority of their line squatted, with almost everything in their line, bar a few cavalry units and a few things that'll probably go into the Cities of Sigmar book, completely removed from the game. I think it would be really cool if instead they went into a Kurnothi book. But the Kurnothi themselves represent a thing of, here, if they don't get a book, here's a faction completely unique to Underworlds that exists in the lore, with almost no context. And I don't think G-Dubs is going to let that happen. They don't like to do that. I like everything to have models because it means more product, more sales, more variety. If they make it good, it sells well. If it doesn't, they only make a few lines for it. In Sigma, they don't do very big production lines of models. Everything's multi-part, everything's dual build, with relatively few kits. A lot of the larger factions in Age of Sigmar often have recycled kits from old Warhammer Fantasy. So that's something that is interesting to me, mostly because of the fact of where are they going with this faction, and something that inspires us to go forward is some of the rules which have been shown by Warhammer community so far about the Kurnothi. Representing their close alliances with the Sylvaneth, the Skaith's Wild Hunt fight alongside the tree folk of the Oakenbrow Glade in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. The Oakenbrow Glade. Now, I can't remember exactly which glade they are off the top of my head. I think they're the... it doesn't matter. But still, the article implies that they pretty much fall under the Sylvaneth, or they work with the Sylvaneth as an allied force, which is understandable. Since they don't have an actual faction, their closest allies are the only units that can bring them. And this is interesting. Are they just going to exist in this spot of they just are a Warhammer Underworlds exclusive warband that sits there in the lore as just some mysterious force that suddenly appeared in the lore one day, and they were never really followed up again? You can take them as allies to the Sylvaneth, and that's their only relevance in the game at large. I don't think that'll be the way they go. And yet, it's interesting that they chose to do that. I mean, it makes sense. There's nothing to tie them in with. I would have thought if they were going to make them their own faction with their own battle tome, they would have just held off and used the keywords that they use for that battle tome in their actual rules. But the fact that you go onto Warhammer Community and you look at the screenshot of the rule they've taken there for the Might of Kurnoth spell, it makes me really think, well, it actually targets the Sylvaneth keyword. So maybe this Warhammer band has been designed in such a way that the Kurnothi are an idea that someone in G-Dubs has had, but their book is maybe 6 to 8 months, maybe more away, to the point of we probably won't see a Kurnothi battle tome for almost a year. Which, if so, it strikes me as odd that they would release it. Yet if it was relatively close, you would think that maybe they would release it with its actual keywords and expect us to just wait. This way, it seems like they're just throwing them out there. We use them with the Sylvaneth. Sylvaneth are the only ones who can take them, and they just exist until such a time that G-Dubs decides to revisit them. And that kind of blows my mind a little bit. That's something they've never really done before in this way. It's not something I expected from the specialty game. I'm sort of angry that they have a rule called Fleet of Foot, which I desperately miss for my Eldar. Yeah. Except their Fleet of Foot lets them run and still shoot and or charge. I miss the Fleet of Foot that lets me reroll runs. I miss that. I miss just being able to reroll my run rolls. Eldar that move an extra 1 inch. Anyway. They do, and in this rest of this article, they seem focused on comparing them and putting them in with the Sylvaneth. For a mere 120 points, Skaith Wild Hunt is a great alternative to a Branch Witch or Branch Wraith in a cracking niche in a melee-heavy Sylvaneth list. For one, you will never take a Warhammer Underworlds warband over a Branch Witch or Branch Wraith. Like, ever. I know enough Sylvaneth players to tell you that, and I've read their book enough times to tell you that. Still, it's an interesting thing to consider. Are the Kurnothi this one-off? Will they be expanded? How will they be expanded? Lore-wise, what's the implications there? I feel like this is a discussion to be had, and if anyone feels like joining me in this discussion, in the comments below, please comment. If anyone's got the warband, if you've got any more information on it, please feel free to bring that in. I'll definitely be looking at their lore the moment it becomes available. In the Beastgrave book, because I'm fascinated by this new warband that completely has no context in the rest of Age of Sigmar thus far. And I'm curious where they're going to go with it. Is this our replacement to Wood Elves? Is it something, in the same way that we have our Daughters of Cain and we have our Ideneth Deepkin and we've got our Sylvaneth. Are the Sylvaneth really the replacement to the Wood Elves? Well, sort of not really. What are the Kurnothi? How do they play into it? What's this relationship of Kurnoth and Alarielle in Age of Sigmar? What are the implications they're going for here? And I've seen some discussion on Discords going, well, maybe this is a new destruction faction. I'm thinking no, because of the specific reference in the rules to the Sylvaneth, and the specific reference to Alarielle, and the fact that it's just Kurnoth in general. He's going to be Order, because it's elves. Still, that's something to think about. I've prattled on long enough. I'm generally curious about these elves, because what could be going on with them? What sort of army could be created around them? I'll definitely do a follow-up video once we have our hands on the Beastgrave book. Beastgrave itself is on pre-order, and once I can find out more about them, I will be all up on that in a follow-up video. In the meantime, type below away in the comments what these elves mean to you, what your thoughts on them are. Particularly now that we've seen some rules, we know a little bit of that little blurb there. Because they took me completely by surprise when they announced them. Alright. This has been Jay from Jade Productions, signing off.